Welcome back to the Lost Info Podcast. As always, this is Keeping You Awake, Jake. Now, on this case file, we have an amazing guest. I've been waiting a long time to talk to him. It's surreal for me as well, as it will be for all of the guests. But, as we think of the world in the modern times, we tend to forget that all these ancient cultures had a lot figured out, and probably more than we want to believe. This man is an inspiration for decoding the past. He is a scholar in his own sense. This guy has a master's degree in psychology. He has also got a doctorate in counseling education of psychology from Memphis State University. Now, he has a wide variety and array of topics, so we will hope to have him on again because I'm sure that we're not going to be able to get all that we want out of our guests because he is involved in topics such as UFOs, psychic abilities, archaeology, paranormal phenomenon. He is also author and co-author of 70 books, which is a very big range of topics, as you can tell. He has also been involved in many documentaries, very educated on Edgar Cayce, which is one of those individuals in our history that, I mean, you can't say enough to cover what that guy was involved in, really. He also spent a lot of time with his wife looking for Atlantis, which is also very cool. This guy knows so much about our history that I love the fact that we have him on for our show. And with no further ado, our guest is Gregory L. Little. How you doing?
I'm doing fine, Jake. Thank you for that. Call me Greg, if you will. And
Sure.
For those who want to look me up on, say, Facebook or on Google, put that L in there, make it Gregory L. Little, and I'll pop up, and you'll find me on Facebook and Twitter and anything else. It's a pleasure to be here, and we'll see where all this goes. Thank you so much for all that. And none of that information covers my real profession. I'm actually a criminal psychologist and been involved in that since 1975, a long, long time.
Wow.
And of course, my university, Memphis State University, no longer exists. Don't you hate it when they change the name of your college or school? They say, where'd you go to school at? And you say the name. They go, well, I never heard of that. It doesn't exist anymore. Well, they changed the name to the University of Memphis. But all my degrees say Memphis State University. And for those of us that did it back then, we stick with the old name. Anyway.
That's an interesting part on the criminal psychology. So did you work with some organizations to try to find the psychology of some of these crazy assholes?
I have, you mentioned the 70-some, it's actually 71 books in print now, which keep adding them. But more than half of those are in that field: criminal treatment, criminal personality, any social personality, treatment of trauma, that kind of stuff. And I have been in that field a long time. I ran programs in Tennessee's largest prison for drug and alcohol treatment programs in a mental health unit for 16 years, and then did consulting work all over the country and in Sweden and several other countries, Puerto Rico and elsewhere, and have done that for a long time. And I'm still active in that field. Most of our work is in the field of really basic treatment of criminal personality and trauma. We're very big in all the Veterans Administration hospitals, drug courts, and so on. So veterans courts, Native American courts, and we'll get to talk about Native Americans some here, one of my real favorite topics.
Absolutely.
But anyway, that's my professional field.
That's also one of my favorites as well, as Native Americans, because obviously they had a lot figured out that we do not. And whatever they were doing they were doing it right. They just had a better sense of the world, how everything works together with the that a lot of people call it, or just knowing what was actually happening in their existence. And I think that we've fallen away from a lot of that, in not even just America, but the world. I think that we have a lot of disconnect on not only the past, but how we relate with one another and the environment. So,
absolutely. Well, let's follow that just a second. Native Americans. Okay, the mound builders in particular. We know a great deal now about mound builder beliefs and their cosmology. And mound builders had a concept about creation, which has to do with a big bang. It had to do with a singularity. That's actually a term that was used way long ago when people analyzed their beliefs and got them to talk about those beliefs.
And that goes on the one, right?
It's like the Big Bang, the singularity that started the Big Bang. Well, the mound builders had a belief that there was a singularity. It was made from pure energy. And almost the moment that it came into being, it developed into two sort of not opposing sides, but complementary sides, and that it started swirling. And if you conceive of a yin-yang symbol, where it's a round circle and it has a blob at the top and one at the bottom, and it goes around and around. The moment that those two sides developed and started swirling, the singularity burst. That is, it exploded, and it created a three-part universe. And the Native Americans believed that the universe is made of three different worlds: an upper world, a middle world, which is what we live on, and a lower world. And it was all about those two competing forces. That's the key in this. They were the force of creation and entropy. Entropy is the breakdown of anything that's created. Entropy is a concept in physics, and it says no matter what's created, no matter what we put together, it will start to dissolve and degrade and go back to its original form, whatever it was. Anything that's created eventually falls apart, and that is the process of entropy. So there are those two forces, entropy and creation, that explain virtually everything. Now, when humans came into the picture, this is one of the deepest beliefs that Native Americans had, and all this is going into a new book. Some of it's in a self-help book that I put out last year with a couple of co-authors. But the purpose of humans in this, and Native Americans in particular, was human beings were tasked and were obligated to maintain the balance between creation and entropy, those two forces. They had to maintain a balance between they're both spiritual worlds now. Creation and entropy, upper world, lower world, are both spiritual worlds. They manifest on Earth, and Native Americans were tasked with maintaining harmony and balance in those. So they lived a simpler life on purpose. They did not believe that land could be owned. And actually, if you think about the truth about land ownership today, even if you own a property, you don't really own it. And here's why. It's not just money you might own it. Let's say you pay it off free and clear. Well, if you don't pay taxes on it, it's gone. Yeah, right. You have to pay on it all the time.
Even in the world that we exist in, countries, we have border lines, but those are really, they're imaginary lines that were
arbitrary. Yes.
Yeah, they were created by an organization that said this is ours. But as far as reality goes, this world is the individuals that live on it all together. And so I like that point, because it really, they set it for what they want it to be, but it doesn't mean that you're not welcome here other than what they say. You know what I mean?
Right.
Well,
that's why partly why the Native Americans were supposedly easily pushed off the land, because they didn't believe anybody could own it anyway.
Right.
But in the course of them being tasked with maintaining harmony between those great spiritual forces, they erected mounds, sacred spaces out of earth and rock, various kinds of earthworks, geometric earthworks all over the Americas. I've said this many times. Native American earthworks and mounds are the most unappreciated archaeological treasures in the world. We have mounds and earthworks older than anything in Egypt. Mounds were started in South America.
That was another thing I was actually going to ask you about, because everything that I've researched with you is that you seem to be pulled towards mounds in particular, and I find it very interesting because they're not talked about in the mainstream or anything else.
Very little. They're coming into a little more prominence, particularly after 1990. Maybe we can. That had to do with a law that the federal government passed called NAGPRA, NAGPRA, Native American Grave Protection and Repatriation Act. And what that act said is that archaeologists can't just go out and start doing excavations. So they had to do something else. So they began to actually talk about mounds and look into the symbols and the purposes and so on. But yes, I'm pulled to mounds. I have been to Egypt. I've been all over Egypt. I've been in all over Central America and the Yucatan, several other places we have been. And American mounds, the most complex geometric earthworks found anywhere in the world, are here in the United States, North America. Okay. Mounds in South America were built 10,500 years ago. Mounds in North America were built 6,700 years ago. That's how far back these things go. Whereas in Egypt, the oldest mound dates to 3200 BC, 5,200 years ago. So Egypt is relatively young compared to the New World, North and South America.
So that brings me one question that I personally had on our timeline. And obviously, there's a lot of people that understand that our timeline is very fragmented and not exactly accurate. Now, on your perspective, on the timeline, because there's, a lot of people say that humanity and human beings to the evolved, or what they describe, it came out of Africa.
Yeah.
Now, there's a lot of controversy that actually is false, and that it might be on more of the Western world, South America and America, North America. What do you think on that?
Well, I'll tell you what Edgar Cayce said, then I'll tell you what I think. Edgar Cayce said that humans, us, modern humans, developed in 5 different areas of the world. And the evidence does appear to pretty much point to some genetic variations occurred in different places, resulting in what Cayce called it a yellow race, a red race, a brown race, a white race, and a black race. And he said that we all came from the same original spot, wherever that is, but we then developed into 5 unique sort of races, and he said it was for spiritual purposes. I won't go into that because I don't know. I do know that there is some good evidence that shows that evolution occurred outside of Africa. Evolution definitely occurred in Africa. There is no doubt about it. The oldest bones ever found of humans and proto-humans have been found in Africa. However, you have to realize that the environment and the ground and the humidity, the amount of rain, and all those things play a role. And Africa is a place where bones will last for millions of years, whereas in North America, you really can't find bones that are human bones that are more than 10,000 years old.
Is that because they don't let excavating happen as much?
No, it's because here the bones degrade so quickly because of our environmental conditions. The same thing is true in South America. The bones degrade very quickly. We know that people were in a new book with Andrew Collins, a British author who is on Ancient Aliens a lot. Sure, Andrew and I have co-authored a number of things, but we're working on this new book, and in it, Andrew actually visited Israel to start this book, and he goes back to roughly 400,000 years ago to people living in Israel in caves there, and performing rituals and ceremonies. That is all from mainstream archaeologists at the major universities in Israel. He actually went to the universities. He held a number of the artifacts that they excavated in his hand, interviewed them. They took him out to the site and showed him everything. And so things go back a lot further than everybody believes. When I went to school, and probably I'm a bit older than you, but when you went to school, it was probably the same thing. They told us that human civilization started developing around 3000 BC or so in Babylonia or Sumeria, in that area. And that is no longer true. It's not even close to the truth. The truth is we don't even know where it began.
So why do you think that they don't put that in our textbooks or teach us that?
Well, I think they are beginning to alter it a bit. I can tell you Zahi Hawass. You familiar with him? Zahi Hawass was the head of Egyptian archaeology for many, many years. Quite a controversial figure. Just a few years ago, Zahi was at a conference, and this is on film, and he was asked about the site of Göbekli Tepe in Turkey. Göbekli Tepe dates to over 12,000 years ago. All right, it's the most incredible site ever found anywhere on the world. Absolutely. And it showed sophisticated technology and sophistication in probably architecture, and in agriculture, and in carving of stones and lots of other things. It was present 10, 12, 14,000 years ago. Well, Zahi was asked about it. And Zahi said, no, Egypt is the oldest ever. It's 5,000 years old. And they said, what about Göbekli Tepe? And he said, what about it? And they said, what about Göbekli Tepe? And he said, what is that? And they told him what it was. And he said, well, I don't know anything about that. What does that have to do with Egypt? Well, the answer, it doesn't have anything to do with Egypt. It's in Turkey, but it's far older than Egypt. And so what my point is that archaeologists get stuck in their belief system and their ideas, and they don't seem to adjust. They don't seem to keep incorporating new information.
I guess that's one of the questions that I've always had is why isn't, when they set like a timeline, they stick so hard to it that they won't admit that, okay, maybe we weren't right on this, and take some knowledge that we have now and reincorporate it. It's more like, we'll just stick to the timeline that we had. Yeah. And so that was another question that I might have had for you on this topic in particular is, so if we look at carbon dating, and I wanted to have a carbon dating professional on here soon, but they talk about basic carbon dating, just for a quick recap, is taking the organics, the organics of carbon, and then dating it when they find some. So like when they find certain bones or whatever else, but not even that, and we go back 12,000 or 30,000 or 40,000 years, how accurate do you think that really is? And why isn't it that they try to recalibrate our timeline?
Well, they did just recalibrate it again, and they recalibrated it. I don't remember the last time. I want to say it was in the 70s or 80s. I can't recall. And I've had carbon dating done in some of the research that we did in the Bahamas. And we'll get to that. You can actually carbon date some stone. I'll call it stone. People say you can't, but that's not true. You can.
It does have a half-life, right?
Well, that's what you're testing. And certain types of stone, particularly beach rock, limestone, carbonate limestone you can carbon date carbonate limestone. You can't carbon date granite or anything like that. But so the reason that I believe that they're not really adjusting very well, and we're talking about archaeology now,
right?
It's because they're not really scientists. It's the psychology involved in this. It's the psychology of belief systems, and I've written a lot about that. They use scientific methods, but that doesn't make them a scientist. They use scientific methods, and they come up with a hypothesis. But then what happens with them is their belief systems get entrenched into this. They buy in to a particular hypothesis as a theory, and then it's proposed as a fact. The best example is Clovis first. Clovis first was the idea that a people, which they called Clovis after a type of spear point that was found in Clovis, New Mexico, that they were the very first people in the Americas. And Clovis first was dominant in mainstream archaeology until 1997. And it took to about the year 2002 or 3 for them to really stop the Clovis first theory, that in terms of it being dominant. So from the 1930s to 1997 or the year 2000, anybody who went against the Clovis first theory or even showed evidence that went against Clovis first, they were literally destroyed. And what that shows is that it's a belief system at work, not science. Science adjusts.
Well, now,
scientists will say we're wrong. We adjusted.
Right. Is that a belief system that they have gathered by their peers, or do you think that is what is educated to them when they're in that field?
I think it's educated to them. I have some people that I know quite well that went into the field of archaeology. They are indoctrinated is probably a better way to put it. Right. And I have written, and I still believe archaeology has the characteristics of a cult.
Okay.
Mainstream archaeology destroys anybody who goes against them. They don't like outsiders fiddling around in their field or even writing in their field. Andrew Collins and I and Graham Hancock and all the others that write in alternative history fields are despised by mainstream archaeology. And that is the characteristics of a cult, looking down on anybody on the outside that doesn't share their belief system. They rigidly control the amount of money that goes to different people for excavations. They control all the academic positions, and they control it as a belief system. It's more of a cult than a science. Again, it uses scientific methods, but I really believe that archaeology is a cult.
Well, now I tend to believe you on that because I look at a lot of other aspects of our current world, and it is operated the same exact way, is where if it doesn't fit to their narrative and they control all the research, the education, and everything else, that it is the narrative that they want. And if they don't abide to that, then they are either made to look like a fool, X'd out of the study or category. And it seems to happen a lot in our world now. It's more than, well, I can't say before because I don't know, but maybe
it is
in the
more.
Maybe so even more, because in the last 50 years, it seems that nobody spoke out against anything in archaeology until more recent. There's been a couple people, you and maybe Andrew Collins, and Graham Hancock's one of a widely known man that has spoke out. But other than that, the people that are within that study or graduate from a university that's highly regulated by, archaeology or whatever it is, or whatever category, seems to be held by these standards that they just can't go outside the box on what they've found as logic rather than belief.
Well, there's a lot of examples in that. And we could spend the entire time giving examples of how they indoctrinate people and make them believe in something. But one of the things that I have a pet peeve right now that I'll bring up, and there's no side in what I'm about to say, but in the past 6 months or so, we hear the word science brandied around a lot. Follow the science, follow the science.
Yes.
And what all that means is that there are people that have opinions. Some of those people with opinions have PhD, EDD, or MD behind their name. And if enough of them gather up and give the same opinion, that's the science. The science actually tells us there's not a whole lot we can do, and there's not a lot here we really understand, and we certainly haven't mastered what's going on. But you hear people brandy this idea of follow the science all the time. And what it sounds like to me when they say, hey, you got to follow the science, it's the same thing that was said during the Inquisition when they said you have to do what God says or do what the church tells you to do.
Right.
It is the exact same thing. Now, when science is giving us an exact number, then I'm pretty happy with that. When they give us real numbers and real data, but most of the time we're hearing opinion. We're not hearing real facts and data. We are hearing someone's opinion.
Well, I think we also have a lot of that right now with the COVID.
Yes,
they're
that's
saying,
exactly
listen
what I'm
to the
referring to.
science, but the scientists even admit they have no idea what's really going on, nor do
Right.
they have a good way to test, but everybody's listening to quote unquote the science, and they don't even know. So, and they've even
They're not
admitted
really
it.
sure.
Yeah.
They're not really
Well,
sure.
before we
Okay.
go on to too much current stuff, because
yeah, I know.
but the real reason that I've had you on is because a lot of your interests happen to fall in with mine, and I hope my listeners too. Obviously, they've will listen to this podcast for a certain reason, and it's because we like to dive into the lost info. And one thing that I really want to go back into, and it's a book that you, I believe you co-authored, was The Path of Souls.
Yeah.
And that to me is a very interesting, there you go. Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you for all of the viewers, listeners. He showed The Path of Souls. Also, you can find all that in the show notes when we post this. But The Path of Souls, to me, is very interesting because there was a lot of ancient beliefs of how this happened, and it correlated to a lot of other cultures that weren't even in the same location. So if you want to maybe dive into a little bit of The Path of Souls, that would be great.
Okay, well, the Path of Souls relates to the death journey of the soul, and it's the path that souls will take to return to the world from which they came. So it's a Native American concept. It is probably the exact same thing in Egypt. Graham Hancock read The Path of Souls, and I also have a summary of that in an encyclopedia on mounds I did and some other books. But Hancock read that and actually took that information and compared it to Egypt, and that is in his book America Before. He credits Path of Souls in that for some of that information. However, here's the story. Native Americans and Native American artifacts from mound builders have long been a mystery. There are these amazing artifacts recovered from what are basically called Mississippian era mound sites, which are very large complexes, predominantly in the southeast of the United States, that have truncated pyramids. The word truncated means flat top. Large mounds. Moundville, Alabama is one of the best examples. There are 20 giant mounds at Moundville arranged around a central plaza. There's one big mound right in the center that was used for observations. So from Moundville, it's probably the site that I'll just stick with. There are hundreds and hundreds of these sites, but I'll stick with Moundville.
In North America, you mean, or all over the world?
Oh yeah, in North America. Just
okay.
Probably, I believe there were once 1 million mounds.
But there's probably all over the world too.
Mounds. Oh yeah, mounds are everywhere.
Okay.
In Sweden is loaded with mounds.
I mean,
that are
I've
identical.
seen an Ancient Aliens that did a topic on like mounds, but and we'll probably cover that as you go on to The Path of Souls. But the mounds, they have a significance that we're probably not really sure of.
That's where we're going with this.
Okay.
Hopefully we'll get to that. Well, I hope. Yeah. Okay. So these artifacts were pulled out of the mounds, excavated, mainly starting in the 1700s, 1800s, and 1900s. One good example is like a disc that had a depiction of a hand with what looks like an eye in the palm of the hand, and it's known as the eye in hand. Okay. You see all these other symbols of snakes and of snakes with feathers on them, flying serpents, or better known as a feathered serpent.
Quetzalcoatl.
Well, yes, that would be the Aztec or the Central American feathered serpent.
Okay.
The one in North America was a long time. The one that was seen here was often tied into that, but they really didn't know the beliefs on this until around the year 2000 or so. You would also see on some of these artifacts a skull, a wide-eyed skull, and you'd see a bone like an ulna or a femur, just a single bone, an ulna or a femur. And you'd also see a skull that had what looks like a speech box coming out of its mouth, kind of like if you look at a cartoon a comic strip, and you see a character has a little speech box or speech bubble coming out, and you'll see words written in the bubble. Well, there are artifacts that show a skull that has like a speech bubble with nothing written in it. So those symbols, no one really knew what they were. They always thought they will always be a mystery. So starting around the year 1990, archaeologists and ethnographers started getting together and trying to figure out what in the world they meant. And they actually went and pulled books from libraries of all places that were published in the 1800s. There are loads of them, literally hundreds of books on ethnology published in the 1800s. The Smithsonian did a lot of them, what was then called the Bureau of Ethnology. And some of those are thousands of pages in length, huge books, and they hadn't been digitized. They're not digital. So a lot of people don't do anything unless it's on the internet. They wouldn't even know how to go into a library and look for anything anymore.
Absolutely.
So archaeologists began looking into those, doing computer analyses, reading these, and lo and behold, here's what they found. That those symbols all were on the most sacred in a set of rituals for a death journey. So the bottom line to it is this. Here's what it's about. There's two souls. Human beings have two souls. One soul is called the life soul. The life soul is tied to the physical earth. That is our physicality. The Native Americans knew we were made out of dirt and minerals and water. And all of those things needed to be returned to the earth after death. So they called that the life soul. Our body was animated. Remember, I talked in the beginning about a singularity.
Right.
And the singularity was spiritual. Everything is spiritual in nature.
So when you say the life soul of like minerals and dirt, it's not the essence of like a consciousness.
No, it has no consciousness. It is it has a spiritual nature.
Okay, just tied into the one.
Yes, it may actually have a form of primordial consciousness. I say primordial, but not a self-awareness. But they believed everything was spiritual in its nature. That was called animism by the early priests and the black robes who met the Native Americans. Of course, they thought they were all demon-possessed and witches. And they said they believe everything's alive. Well, they didn't believe everything was alive. They believed that everything was spiritual, everything.
Right. Okay.
So there's this life soul. But at death, the life soul goes back to the earth, and there is another soul which came from the sky, and it's called the free soul. It is pure energy. It has consciousness. It has memories. And it is what most of us would consider as a soul. That soul had to make a journey back to the sky world and beyond. And so that journey has been figured out. That is what the Path of Souls book is all about. And in summary, here's the journey. In general, this Path of Souls ritual took place around the winter solstice, around December 21st of every year in the winter. And there would be, within mound complexes and earthworks, they would have had bonfires for cremations set up that night. And when you cremated the body, that was that was really the cue or the signal to the free soul to make a leap. And what the free soul did early in the morning, generally it's around 3 a.m. This has all been calculated.
The witch's hour.
Yeah, around 3 a.m.
So they say.
Yeah, the free soul would make a leap of faith from whatever the mound complex was across the body of water, which was usually a river, and aim toward Orion, the constellation of Orion.
So when you say the body of water, is that on our plane, or is it?
That's on our plane. They always set these mound complexes up where they
by a river or a lake or something.
That's
like
right.
That? Okay.
So they were aiming toward the west. That's where the soul was making a leap toward the west. Okay. Now, in North America, during the winter months, Orion starts when nighttime comes. You see Orion in the high eastern sky. Around 3 to 4 a.m., Orion sets into the western sky because the Earth rotates and the stars appear to move.
Right.
Now, it's not really Orion they're heading toward. What the ancients saw, what the Native Americans saw in the constellation of Orion was a hand a dangling hand. The 3 belt stars of Orion were the wrist of the hand, and then the fingers dangled downward on the western side, and the eye in the hand is called Orion's Nebula, or Messier 42. And Messier 42 is a fuzzy spot. You can see it below the 3 belt stars when Orion's in the west. So that occurred around 3 a.m., right before Orion sank into the western horizon.
Okay.
The next night, Orion came up in the eastern horizon, of course, and that represented the Sol was tucked away in that eye, or Orion's Nebula, which the natives called it an Ogi.
And that's the center one of Orion, or?
No, it's not. So you got the 3 belt stars, and below the 3 belt stars.
So in the middle of the palm.
Yep, that's the palm. It's a fuzzy star. You can see it pretty clearly. It's not really a star. It's a nebula. Lots of stars in it.
Okay.
It was considered to be a portal, an Ogi. It's spelled O-G-E-E. And Ogi means portal or doorway. So the Sol tucked away in that, and then they knew it went under and around the earth. So that was the trip through the underworld. Same thing occurred in Egypt, by the way. It came up on the eastern horizon the next night, and then as soon as it got dark and you could see Orion, the Sol would leap out of that Ogi and get on the Milky Way and begin a trip toward the north on the Milky Way. The Milky Way is the path of souls, the river of souls.
So that part is very similar to the Egypt, saying that
exactly.
They jumped into the Milky
Way. It's identical. Yeah.
Well, I was going to say to ride the flow or whatever, because they called it a river or something.
Right. That's exactly true.
Okay.
And so on the way, on this trip, there were trials and tribulations, but eventually this soul met a judge. Same thing as in Egypt. A judge actually weighed the soul. And
so somewhat in like Christianity, they say that the gatekeeper or St. Peter or whatever you want to call it. Okay.
All right. So when it gets to this, the judge in this case was usually depicted as a giant raptor bird, which is an eagle, sometimes a hawk. There were 2 Native American tribes, one of which said it was a buffalo woman. Another one said it was an old man. But that's the constellation of Orion, which Orion in Greek mythology is a swan. The Native Americans saw it as, it's also called the Northern Cross in Native American cosmology. Cygnus. What am I saying? Orion. Cygnus. The constellation of Cygnus is in the north. Cygnus is the swan. Of course, Orion's not. Orion's the hunter. But Cygnus is the swan. When the soul reached Cygnus, it met this judge, this giant bird. And if it passed the test, it was allowed to then move through a portal. And out of this portal, it went to what they call the other world, which the very early ethnographers called the happy hunting ground. And they were actually tricked by Native Americans. They'd say, well, what happens when you die? And they go, oh, happy hunting ground. It was more of a way to joke with the early ethnographers than to tell them the truth.
Or quote unquote heaven.
Yeah. So you have this. So the trip is very simple. It's Orion to the Milky Way, up the north of the Milky Way till you get to the Cygnus constellation, CYGNUS. That was Andrew Collins' discovery. And then at Cygnus, it met a giant bird. The bird then was a judge. If the dead soul passed the test then, or the judgment, it was allowed to go through a portal. The portal is believed to be the star Deneb, D-E-N-E-B, which is the brightest of all the Cygnus constellation stars. Deneb once served as the North Pole Star. It was the northern pole star, roughly 14,000 to 15,000 years ago. And at that exact time, Orion was on the extreme southern horizon. So 14,000 years ago, if you look to the due south through the night, you would see Orion's belt right on the southern horizon. And if you look to the north, you would see the Cygnus constellation on the northern horizon with the star Deneb serving as the North Pole star. So we believe that's when this belief system occurred. And then because of precession, where the sky moves because of the Earth's wobble, or apparently moves because of the Earth's wobble, over time, Orion has moved slowly toward the northwest and toward the northeast, and Cygnus has moved toward the southwest. But they retained that meaning. That is the path of souls. That is the journey. It's been found to be valid in ancient cultures all over the world, including
they're very similar in every way they described it, even if, translation of, carvings and everything else, that it's very similar on opposite ends of the world, which leads you to think that they might have known a lot more than we do.
Well, I do believe they knew a lot in terms of how to manipulate certain energies and powers that exist. And that's actually what we're working on right now. I've written a lot about it before, but the Earth generates certain energy. And this is not a woo-woo concept. This is mainstream physics. The Earth generates a great deal of energy on its own. It has been studied by scientists in several different times for many years.
Tesla was probably one of the leading individuals on how to harness it.
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely.
He's one of the great figures in history that I've always wanted to know more about, and the fact that they discredited him so much it is kind of like, when you start researching him, you're just like, this guy, he was willing to give patents for the better of humanity. He was willing to do a lot of things, and they definitely didn't like that.
Well, Edison certainly was not a Edison took a lot from Tesla initially, but Edison played quite a role in the demise of Tesla.
I was going to say the monetizing of electricity, so that you could profit instead of making this a better world for everybody. Now, when I think about Tesla, I think that what he talked about in going to a realm of where he said everything, the information was available, and like he played on the 3, 6, and 9s, was said to be the answer of the universe. I think he was going beyond the consciousness that we are either conformed to stay in those bounds or something of that nature, which again, I think that Native Americans and I think a lot of other cultures were on the cusp of being able to get outside those bounds to find certain information that we have lost in this time.
Yeah, shamans certainly did. Shaman, or the way they're usually described, is that they could use this energy. It's a vibrational kind, probably electromagnetic, but a vibrational energy, and they could use it like an elevator for their consciousness to move up and down.
It was almost like we planned that, which we didn't. Because that was the little segue that I was about to go into, was a whole topic that I had found of you bringing in a shaman into your home.
Okay, I lost you there, but when you said shaman, I couldn't hear you. But when you said shaman, shaman into the home, I know what you want.
Okay, I heard that topic, and it was almost like we planned that, which we did not. But it was a story that I heard that you brought a shaman and his family into your home.
Yeah, this was back in, and actually the new book actually almost starts with this again. And I started a 1990 book called People of the Web, which was actually, it's still my favorite book I've ever done. It's out of print. You can find some used copies here and there, but anyway, People of the Web. There's a guy named Lou White Eagle, and in 1989, Memphis had this controversy that developed. The archaeology department of Memphis State University was doing a dig at a set of mounds called DeSoto Mounds. Okay. It's no longer called DeSoto Mounds. It's not Chickasaw Park in downtown Memphis, right on the Mississippi River, where I live. Anyway, this controversy had occurred, and Native Americans were trying to stop them from doing this excavation at the mounds. And I decided, I was then working for the local government, like I told you. I was an official really within the prison system, but I had a government car and was allowed to do whatever I wanted to do and come and go. So I actually drove from this prison downtown and walked around this mound site when all this took place, and was suddenly accorded some sort of status. I don't know why, but the Native Americans there immediately took a liking to me, and they introduced me to this guy by the name of Lou White Eagle, who was the arrow priest of the Cheyenne tribe. Now, the arrow priest of the Cheyenne tribe was then the highest priest remaining. They used to have a different one. His name was Edward Red Hat. He had died a few years prior, and his grandson, Lou White Eagle, took over his position, but he hadn't
Just
ascended
for
to
my
the
own
highest
knowledge
level.
on this,
Yeah.
because I really like Native American culture, is the chief, is he the, like, basically the holder of the knowledge of the
No.
past?
No.
It's the shamans.
Well, the chief might. Now, are you talking about modern Native or the way it was?
I'm just saying, like, the way that it kind of unfolds is like we have this,
Yeah.
I guess, imagery in our head, or the way that it's perceived is that the chief kind of runs the tribe as it was in the past. But I was wondering, wouldn't the shaman have more of the knowledge of everything
The shaman
because
and
of their
there are medicine
capabilities?
people. There are these secret societies within all Native American tribes, all of them.
Okay.
There's in the new thing we're working on, I go into great detail in these. There are a whole bunch of secret societies, and their knowledge is all passed down by word of mouth. So
Okay.
it's all verbal. There are storytellers. The storytellers generally are telling children's tales, and they are tales to impart a certain amount of wisdom, but it's mainly morals. There are stories about animals, for example, and people getting lost and an animal helping them and weather phenomena. Those are all used as simple ways to explain to children what is right and what is wrong and how the world operates. But there is a deeper level called sacred stories and sacred tales. Those were held as secrets by the shaman and the medicine people and the various secret societies. The chief, and now there's a difference between, say, modern chiefs. Tribes today have chiefs, and the chief is more of it is an elected official, and tribes today are political organizations, and they are their own nations, although they're within our nation. It's very, very complicated, unbelievably complicated what was done to them. But in the old days, the chief was kind of the arbiter or arbitrator of differing points of view. And he's the person that discussions would center around. But in their belief system, everybody is responsible for their own behavior. But in general, they reached a consensus, and the chief would assist them in reaching a consensus. The chief might also be a storyteller. The chief and the shaman were not the same person, though. That is very, very rare.
Well, I was
They're
actually
hereditary too.
I was wondering which one took the knowledge from the past, but to me, I was thinking that it might be passed to chief, to keep their culture the same. But the more I was thinking is that the shaman would be the one to be able to tap into the past without being told.
Yep, the shaman had this deep knowledge about the spiritual world, how they interacted with it. Whatever the secrets were in their rituals, that's retained by the shaman and the priestly class. The chiefs maintain the day-to-day rituals. For example, we know that the chiefs at these mound sites would appear outside they're usually on the largest mound at these mound complexes, some of which have 100 mounds at them. But the chief would come out at sunrise and welcome the sun. And the chief would also often come out at sunset and basically say goodbye to the sun each day. And that's how they came to be known as sun worshipers, but they're not sun worshipers. They were simply honoring the power behind the sun, and that's all they were doing. And that is very well known. They did not worship the sun. So the chiefs would maintain rituals like that. The chiefs also were empowered with meeting foreigners who came in, with greeting the first Europeans that came in. We know they did that. The shaman and the priestly class stayed away during those encounters. They had very little to do with it. And we know that from everything that De Soto's chroniclers wrote
So
and
do
many
you
of the
think
others.
in the modern times that, because I don't hear a lot about shamans anymore, or
They're still
shamans,
there.
however anybody pronounces it, but I don't hear a lot anymore about it. Is it that you think that maybe because of their vast knowledge, they have almost been phased out in a way?
No, no, they're still there. What has happened is there are several competing factions in Native American reservations, and there's a modernizing faction and there's a political faction. It's like they need money. They need a way to support the people. A
Right.
terrible poverty on these reservations.
Well, I know that you can rent tours or whatever when you go
Yes.
to South America, so that
Yeah.
just for that purpose alone. But
Yeah.
like when I look into North American tribes, you don't really have anything for the
They're not
shaman.
going to. Well, they're not. They exist. The
Yeah.
Hopis still have a priestly class. The Cheyennes still do.
Okay.
All of the tribes still have secret societies and secret classes. The Zuni, you can't go to the Zuni tribes, for example, in the Southwest and find out anything. They will sell you trinkets. You can go to casinos. They'll gladly take your money. They'll let you stay in their
Well,
hotels.
I almost think that's, I don't like that as much, because I know the secret societies in this world, in our current world, have basically done us wrong in the fact that they've hoarded all the information for us to progress. But I don't think that, I feel that it's not the same in the Native American.
No, it's not.
But yeah, so when you just say secret societies, I don't know if some of the listeners might think like, oh, these are the people that hoard all of the information.
No,
but
what they're protecting it. What
yeah,
they are doing is protecting
like
sacred information from it becoming profane. They do not want it sold. They don't want members of the organization to hold a conference and say, hey, we're going to sell you all the secrets of Native Americans, pay $100 and come to our conference this day. They don't want to do that. And they believe that the power of that sacred knowledge will dissipate if everybody knows what it is.
Absolutely would.
And they still exist.
Humans
they still exist.
The only thing with the difference that I see now talking to you is that the secret societies of the past of our modern world have kept it all for their benefit and not ours. And Native Americans, secret societies, quote unquote, are holding it from being exploited.
Exactly.
Okay.
That is a major, and none of their information. Here's the thing. The secrets, the actual secrets of themselves, none of them have to do with exploitation. There's a great word that you used, exploiting. None of it is used to gather power or gather money or gather control over others. It's all about how to maintain harmony in this spiritual universe.
And I love the word harmony because I use it in a nonprofit that I had. And it's basically to, not exploit, not do any harm, but just merge what we have going on with what was in the past. And so I think that's a great, like you were saying, the explanation of the differences for the viewers, because when a lot of people hear secret societies that haven't researched the past or researched cultures on what they do, it seems like because of the modern world, the holding of information to benefit the elites or the people that hold it. So
well, none of what they did, some of them are called medicine societies, secret medicine. And the word medicine in Native American doesn't mean what it means to us. Medicine for them it's the word power. And by the term power, again, it's the power to harmonize with the spiritual world. Harmony is everything with them. Harmony and with the spiritual universe is everything. The Navajo, the only group that'll tell you all that. The Navajo are really open about it. They will tell you it's all about harmonizing with nature. That's what everything is about. And
It
so
absolutely is.
they do try to harmonize with nature. They believe you should not exploit
Well, I was
things.
going to say it's like the yin and yang and everything else.
Yep.
It's a way to balance, because you're going to have bad with the good. You can't stop evil. You can't stop bad. If there's good, there's both. But it's making it work in a harmony to where, it doesn't just completely destroy one side or the other.
Right.
Right. Before we get out of time, and there's so many things I want to talk to you about. I honestly really appreciate your work. Anybody that's listening on the Lost Info podcast, you can go to the lostinfopodcast@gmail.com if you'd like to ask me any questions to relay to Greg, or Gregory L. Little, if you want to look him up on Facebook. But he has so much to offer. Please go out and look at his books. We'll have the show notes below. But another thing I wanted to go into before we run out of time on this episode, well, I mean, there was a lot, but I know that you've done a lot into UFO abductions and the UFO crashes. But more than that, and we might do that on another episode, was rituals. Rituals.
Yeah.
And there was one other thing the rituals and giants is what I really wanted to kind of go into. If we have time to maybe, I don't know, split those up. If not, we'll do it again. But I think that importantly, in this current time, we don't really believe in rituals, like as far as people as a whole.
Yeah.
We don't believe they exist. And at one time, they had sites that actually hosted these rituals. And I believe personally that in this modern time, they do rituals right in front of your face. They're just not as apparent because they look like massive events, like,
Yeah.
the Vegas shooting or the collapse of the towers. But those are all sacrifices of humans. And so rituals is a very interesting thing to me because I don't think we have any grasp on what that actually was.
Let me go back. All right, I'm going to answer that, and I'm going to go back and answer what I didn't answer before. Let me get back to Lou White Eagle, okay? Because a ritual is what made me decide to have him and his family come stay with us.
Okay.
So back in 1989, when this dig was going on, this guy by the name of Lou White Eagle, who was the arrow priest of the Cheyenne tribe, he actually was carrying the sacred arrows with him, which go back 2,700 years or so. Right. He showed up there and he was leading the protest. And so I became a go-between between the archaeologists and Lou and his little band, which his band actually had some very, very militant Apaches and other Native Americans there that were very upset and ready to fight to keep them from digging at the site. In any event, I don't want to talk about what all happened there, but toward the end of the day, it all got resolved in that the archaeologists were going to walk away. They were not going to do it. They were going to try and figure out a way to do it and to arrange it. And Lou held a ritual. We formed a circle near the largest mound at this site, and he did a pipe and he explained it all. And at the end of it, some bad things happened during that with archaeologists. I don't even want to get into that. The book talks about it, but I don't want to get into that. Okay. But at the end of it, everybody got up and I shook his hand and said, I'm really glad to meet you. And then I just looked around and I saw his kids and his wife, and they got together talking. And I went up for some reason, said, where are you staying? He said, well, I guess we'll just camp here. Sometimes I do his voice. They have a different, a very distinctive way of talking. And I said, well, where are you going to stay here? And he said, oh, we'll probably set up a tent. I said, do you have one? And he said, no, we don't. And I said, well, why don't you go to a hotel or something? And he said, my car won't run. I said, what do you mean? And his fuel pump had gone right when he got there. It just gone. So I don't know why, just immediately I said, well, come stay with us. So he and his wife and his 3 kids.
That's how that happened.
And I had his car towed to a nearby place where I was living at the time. I lived at a lake at the time. And they moved in with us. The protest at the mound site occurred 30 days. At the end of the 30 days, the city of Memphis city council passed a resolution protecting the mounds, and that ended it. So the archaeologists were not allowed to dig into it. During the 30 days he was there, he demonstrated, well, I got to hold the sacred arrows, which was quite a prize for a Wasishu or a white man. He did a lot of other things. One of the rituals that he would do when we talked about stars and what happens to the soul, he literally would go outside and grab a handful of dirt and come inside and he'd throw the dirt on himself. And he'd say, this is sacred knowledge. I must be purified by it. And all this is in this new book. And then he'd toss some dirt on me too, and I'm sure I needed it.
Did you leave it in your carpet or?
No, you don't do that. You scoop it up. But anyway, you ask about rituals, and the mound sites, virtually all mound sites, virtually all earthwork sites. People hear the word earthworks. Well, let me describe an earthwork for you. There's an earthwork in Newark, Ohio, which is about 70 miles due east of Columbus, Ohio. It's the largest and most complex geometric earthworks in the entire world. Now, there is a wall of earth, a linear wall of earth. It means a continuous line of earth that is in a perfect circle that encloses 20 acres. That then connects to a perfect octagon that has a wall of earth around it. These walls of earth are around 16 feet high. The octagon encloses 50 acres. So you have a circle connected to an octagon. Inside the octagon, at its 8 points, there is a truncated pyramid mound erected at all 8 points. This thing is gigantic. You could put 8 Roman Colosseums in the octagon alone. That's how big it is.
Wow.
You could put 10 Stonehenges in the circle. It then connects to another circle that encloses 30 acres. It has 16-foot high walls of earth around it with a moat on the inside. It has one opening, and it has these lines of earth everywhere. There are walkways that are a uniform 170 feet wide that have a wall of earth on both sides of the walkways. One of the walkways from Newark, Ohio, runs 56 miles to Chillicothe, Ohio, where an identical formation was built along a river. 56 miles. So you have what is essentially a walkway as wide as an interstate highway with a wall of earth on both sides of this highway for 56 miles. It was built 2,500 years ago. What possible purpose? The purpose is rituals. We know that they did rituals. The rituals were done for 2 reasons. They were done to evoke and commune with spiritual energies. The walls of earth on the exterior are designed to keep the spiritual manifestations confined in an enclosed sacred space so they can't escape, because you don't want to unleash those on the world. So there are rituals done at all of these earthwork sites and all of the mound sites, not just rituals to send the dead souls to the stars, but rituals for eclipses, rituals for lunar movements or the movements of the moon.
I was going to say, as far as the summer or the spring and fall equinox, a lot of rituals were supposedly done at those times, being that probably the alignment of the stars and things of that nature. But I think that we just don't have, well, obviously there's not a real grasp on why they were done so much and so frequently through ancient cultures that we don't even do any now is
well, we're getting there. We're getting to begin to understand it. One big difference I'll just tell you, and this is in the very beginning of this new book with Andrew, which won't be out for 7-8 months. So I'm really jumping the gun here. But here's one big difference.
Title for our fans?
Well, we do, but I'm not giving the title out. But
all right,
anyway,
fair enough.
Here's one big difference. If you get on the computer that you're doing this on and you look at how many Wi-Fi signals you're getting, when I actually wrote the chapter in the very first chapter in the book, I did that. I got on the computer I'm on, and I looked at 21 Wi-Fi signals I'm picking up. 21. That doesn't have anything to do with cell towers or any other signals. I'm getting signals from all my neighbors. I'm getting actual signals from the FBI and from Homeland Security and from the Coast Guard, all where I live. I live on an island in downtown Memphis, and all three of those entities, the Coast Guard, Homeland Security, and the FBI, are all in buildings on the other side of the river from me. So they have very powerful Wi-Fi, which I pick up. I've never tried to get on it because I figure they'll figure out what I'm doing.
Well, I was almost thinking maybe they're watching you for telling.
Well, they can watch me all they want. That's I'm okay with that. I don't care. But anyway,
that might be the conspiracy side of me.
Yeah,
too much information that people need to know.
All right. So, okay, what does that mean? Well, people think Wi-Fi is a bubble of electromagnetic energy. And each Wi-Fi is a slightly different frequency. Otherwise, they'd all be the same. You wouldn't be able to differentiate between them. They're all slightly different. So Wi-Fi is a bubble of electromagnetic energy. And when I say a bubble, whatever that device is you have there, it's not sending a small little beam to your computer and anybody else's computer that connects. It's putting out a huge bubble that's going 360 degrees in all directions. And every other Wi-Fi around you is going 360 degrees in every direction. And every cell phone that's around you is creating a bubble of electromagnetic energy 360 degrees in every direction. People think that when you're not getting any signals on a cell phone, that your cell phone's not active. No, that's when your cell phone is even putting out the most power because it's trying to make a connection.
You're just outside of the bubble.
Absolutely. And so every single tower around you, every phone around you, think of how far phones are communicating to these towers. Every phone is sending a bubble out. It's not sending a straight beam to those towers. It's creating a bubble, and it's just connecting to wherever the closest tower is, the edge of that bubble is, but it's going everywhere.
Right.
All of that electromagnetic energy is affecting you. You don't notice it. And what I've said is this, that we live in an electromagnetic energy cesspool. That cesspool did not exist just 50 years ago. It didn't exist 100 years ago. It didn't exist thousands of years ago. We had an ambient electromagnetic field in the earth known as the Schumann resonance. The Schumann resonance is the same. It is where all human life evolved under. It's right between alpha and theta waves. It is a type of vibrational electromagnetic energy that permeated everything. Today, we are no longer connected with it because we have all of these other electromagnetic fields around us. We don't really know what the effects of all these are. We know that we have increases in all sort of mental disorders now. We know that we have increases in anxiety. We have increases in attention deficit disorder and hyperactivity attention disorder. We have all kinds of other depression, anxiety, and so on. We have people reporting what's called electromagnetic sensitivity, which we know is a very real phenomenon. And I think all of that is deconnecting us from the spiritual world.
Absolutely.
We used to be in harmony with the spiritual world, and now it's almost impossible.
One of my theories that I had was that basically a lot of, the fluoride in water and exactly what you're talking about is all a way to, I don't want to say kill, because I don't know if that's possible, but dissolve the pineal gland.
Yeah.
Which ends up, being one of those mysterious things that's within our brain that makes us individual, makes us dream at night. It's the connection. There's a book. I think it's The Spirit Molecule. I believe that's what it's called.
Yeah, I know where it is.
So the connection to the other side, and that from the very beginning, I think that they've been trying to eliminate that, at least in its size and its capabilities, because it makes you more conform to being exactly what they want and not individual and not spiritual.
Well, it's long been thought of as they've called it the third eye, but it's also it's probably a sense organ that we had that did sense electromagnetic fields. I believe when humans evolved, imagine this, it's 20,000 years ago, and you're living, it doesn't matter where you live, there's saber-toothed tigers, there are all kinds of massive fauna around. Everything from mastodons to woolly mammoths and huge ground sloths, and again, saber-toothed tigers and loads of other animals that can kill you. I think we had electromagnetic sensitivity, and as these animals might get close to us, we could sense their presence. There are people today that can sense when somebody is near them.
Oh, yeah.
There are people today that can sense
They've done studies
electromagnetic
where
fields.
if your family's on the other side of the world, if you're really involved in thought with them, that they can share that same energy.
Right. And I think that's all electromagnetic. And I think the pineal gland probably is the source or the organ which is sensing all that. Yep. And we've lost most of that contact today. Absolutely.
Yep, definitely. I definitely believe that. And that's kind of one of my own personal things, is that I want to do a more extensive research on the pineal gland, because I believe that it's something that they've focused on destroying or eliminating, or, because they say at one time it was the size of a pine cone or an acorn, and now it's the size of a pea.
Yeah.
Which makes me think that they've focused on taking down the size of that for individuals, so that you're not that spiritual and individual as a person.
Well, I think it's definitely happened, whether or not it's been intentional. It's like the electromagnetic fields with all this, all the cell phones and all the other technology. I don't think anybody ever sat down and said, well, let's screw up humans' connection to the spiritual world and do all this. I think it's all about money. That's also why they're not going to study it. Because it's about money.
I also would agree with that. I personally think, and that's just, with me on the secret societies, and the other side of the coin is that people have, or families or elites or whatever you want to call them, Illuminati, whatever, have figured out certain things, and they've focused on that in particular to gain control of this world. But that again is just, opinion and just, observing what we're in now. One other thing that I wanted you to touch briefly on before we leave, just because I find it also very interesting, because there's a very big controversy right now on it in particular, is that you have a lot of shows on it. You have a lot of things as giants in this world.
Yeah.
And I know that there is some in the Bible that have referred to giants that live among us. And the old books from the Bible, which is the book of Enoch, had talked about watchers and things of that nature. I guess just to kind of briefly touch into that, and hopefully again we'll have you on and maybe you can elaborate more on it. But the giants in this.
Sure. Okay. Well, in this book, Path of Souls, we talk about that. Andrew Collins and I were really interested mainly in the Native American giants, the reports of giants by Native Americans. There were many, many reports coming from the first Europeans in North America, Central America, and South America of encountering giants, and they appear to be very credible reports. There are loads of them. Most of the reports talked about people that you'd probably consider to be 7 to 8 feet tall. Certainly entire tribes were 6 to 7 feet tall. In South America, for example, there was a real effort made by the first settlers there to exterminate all of the giant populations. In fact, that was witnessed by none other than Charles Darwin, who visited there, I believe it was 1848, and he saw the extermination of the Ona tribe, which were the last of the giants that was being done on purpose to get them out of the land so the land could be used for grazing and mining. So they were trying to get these indigenous tribes out. However, what Andrew and I were most interested in were the skeletal remains, that had been reported in the Americas in thousands of newspaper articles by many people of some giants that might be as much as 20 to 30 feet tall. Loads of them were in the teens, like 15, 16, 17 feet tall. And so we decided to really dig into that. The first thing we did was to run down some of the newspaper articles and get back to the original reports. Where did these reports come from and how valid were they? That led us eventually to all the scientifically published reports, which were in various scientific journals in the 1800s, as well as the Smithsonian's publications. What we found was that the Smithsonian in the 1800s dug out of mounds 17 skeletal remains that were from 7 to 8 feet in height. 17 that were 7 to 8 feet in height. They were very prominently buried, usually in these immaculate tombs that had lots of artifacts. The tombs are stone tombs that are in the base of these giant mounds that you'll see. Then we also found that there were about another dozen reports that were done in the 1900s up to about 1975 or so, where they had found more skeletal remains, at least a dozen of these reports, more skeletal remains that were excavated for mounds, which are 7 to 8 feet in height. I did some statistical calculations based on what the Smithsonian found. It is statistically impossible for them to have found that many tall skeletons. Today, at one of every 147,000 people is 7 feet high. Let me say that again. One of every 147,000 people is 7 feet high. So statistically speaking, for every 7-foot skeleton the Smithsonian dug up, or these archaeologists in the up to 1974 or so dug up, you should dig up 174,000 others to find one 7-footer. Right. Well, that's not the case. They dug up a few thousand and found 17 that were 7 feet high. And then these others went into individual mounds rather than loads of them. And they seemed in all these large mounds to find these exceptionally tall and robust people. And when I say robust, their bone size is proportionate to height. These aren't tall, skinny people.
Yeah, so
these are massive.
Their muscle mass would be
absolutely
adequate to their height.
Andrew and I believe that they are Denisovan hybrids. Our latest book is this one, Denisovan Origins. I think you've seen that probably.
Yes, absolutely.
And that's the one we're following up in the new one. So that is what we found about it. The reports of the 20-foot skeletons, 30-foot skeletons, we have been able to find a single report of a skeleton found in North America or South America over 8 feet in height that is genuine. And that is, by that, I mean, we haven't been able to run down any original source.
So what do you think that is? Just more
exaggeration? I think it's exaggeration. A lot of these reports are done in sensationalized newspaper reports, and they just quoted some local that said, yeah, that skeleton we found was 30
do you think
feet tall.
On some of the theories of 20-foot individuals, and then as the time went on, they've went different size? Do you think that really holds anything?
All I'm saying here is that in North America, I'm just talking about here.
Sure.
There is a new project ongoing with Hugh Newman, who's also on Ancient Aliens, and Jim Vieira, both of whom are good friends of ours. You ought to have Jim Vieira on. He's the giants expert.
Well, if you could pass on the word,
I will.
I would love to have him on.
You.
Please,
I'll get him
please
for
do.
You. Jim has been on a number of TV series. He was the star of one, The Hunt for Lost Giants.
Yeah.
Jim and Hugh have been working on all the giant reports in Europe, and they've uncovered thousands of those over there. And there does appear to be some documented well over 8 feet in Europe. Andrew and I strictly focused on North America and the Native American ones, and in South America.
So there is a report in Europe that are supposedly over 8 foot. Okay.
Right. Not here.
Honestly,
there's reports.
Yeah. And obviously not proof, just reports. But kind of clarifying, because there's a lot of theories that go into no giants, no tall people in the past. Everybody was a lot smaller than they are now.
They weren't. There were some big people, and they would have been it. We know from
I think one of the theories that I had read was that there was ancient people that were so big that they built the pyramids, and that, I mean, if that was to have any validation of any sort, they would have to be 20 to 30 feet in order to carry those blocks.
Yeah, well, I'll let that I won't. I don't know about.
Okay.
I can't. I do know this, that in the Americas there were a lot of very big. Hernando de Soto, when he went through the South, he encountered a bunch of 7 to 8 feet tall people. They were the chief.
That's still massive
very massive
for a regular population.
Absolutely. And in South America, they found all these 7 to 8 footers, and we know the Europeans went to great lengths to exterminate these big people because they were a threat.
Oh, well, that makes sense too. Another question I had to follow up on the giants was, like, when you get, like, say, the Smithsonian involved in and whatever else, why do you think that it's not they want to display these massive bones, or do they even have these massive bones because they gave them back?
All right. All right. A good question. All right. I've mentioned a couple times a law in 1990. There were actually 2 laws, one in 89 and one in 90. One of them applied to the Smithsonian. The other one applied to everybody else. So both those laws required that you cannot display any Native American bones or artifacts that were removed from burials. And the law also required that they repatriate, or that means send back any bones or burial artifacts that they had. And the Smithsonian did it very quickly. Smithsonian actually had tens of millions of artifacts they had.
So what does that say to you, that they would pass that law? What's that like?
Well, the Native Americans did. The Native Americans actually got that law passed to stop archaeologists from digging willy-nilly.
So what do you say, like, in that general concept of that being passed by Native Americans or us, is it to hide?
No.
Is it to hide something, or is it just not to give it? Like,
well, I remember going to mounds when we started our mound quest in 1983. That's when I started visiting mounds. We would go to museums, and the museums always had Native American bones on display. Moundville did. Moundville had some 7-footers on display. The Moundville, Alabama, and Memphis Chucalissa mounds had hundreds of skeletons on display. Wycliffe Mounds in Kentucky had hundreds. Loads of others had dozens to hundreds of Indian skeletons on display in situ, right where they were buried, totally excavated and exposed. And imagine if Native Americans had gone into cemeteries and dug up all the remains and opened the caskets and then opened it up as a museum and said, "Come on, people, come on in, look at all these dead people."
That makes sense.
So it really is a terrible. It's a terrible sacrilege, and a religious and a spiritual sacrilege to the native tribes to display all that.
That makes
sense.
So
we went to great extents to give them all of that back. They either reburied it all or they cremated it all. And there's not a single skeleton of a giant remaining in the Smithsonian. I contacted the Smithsonian and talked to them, their actual Office of Repatriation, back when I wrote Path of Souls. And they, at the time, and that was 2013 when I contacted them, they had less than 300 remains, and they were all from South America. They were all kept in special storage. No one was allowed to look at them. And they were
talking the remains of the 7 foot and above?
No, they were all from South America. They wouldn't say what it is. They don't even. They said we have artifacts and remains of roughly 300 pieces that we still have. Nothing else do we have. And they said the only reason we have that is we can't find a tribe in South America that'll take it.
Oh, okay.
They said we want to get rid of it because it's costing a fortune to keep it.
Yeah, just to hold it.
Yeah, and we want to get rid of it. They said we got nothing else.
Now, see, I would have thought I like that information, because I would have thought it was the other way around, that the Smithsonian would have been like, "Hey, we don't want to display anything of this to change the timeline and give it back to the tribes." But That's
well,
a
they got
better
rid of the
explanation.
evidence is another way to look at it.
Yeah,
And
exactly.
they knew the Native Americans are never going to display it, and they
Well,
haven't.
right. So
Yeah.
that's kind of what I thought, that they were like, yeah, we'll give it to you so that we're not responsible, nor do we have to display it.
Well, there's a weird piece of this, and maybe we'll end with this, but it's about eugenics. Eugenics is the idea that there is a superior culture. That's what it is. And it's about eugenics was the study of races of human to try and
The Atlantean
find it.
people?
Well, maybe, but eugenics is the Germans did it. The Germans saw the Aryan race as the supreme
okay.
race, whatever. It's
Yeah.
all nonsense. But anyway, the Smithsonian is seeped in eugenics. In the late 1800s and early 1900s, Smithsonian was dominated by eugenics, and Native Americans were seen as a inferior race. Whites were seen as this is not secret knowledge. It's well known. The Smithsonian, of course, does not want to talk about it because, hey, we're in modern times, but they are seeped in this eugenics. So there is good reason for the Smithsonian to deny that there were large Native American skeletal remains, because it means they were bigger than the Europeans, the white Europeans that discovered them, supposedly discovered them anyway.
Well, we still live in that world right now that
yes, we do.
The white European culture is trying to dominate everything still.
Well, with Native Americans, Edgar Cayce, who we haven't talked about, maybe we'll do that next time.
I would love
Edgar
to.
Edgar Cayce specifically
I'm going to cut you off real quick, but
yes, sir.
I think for the fans, we will do an episode on Edgar Cayce, and since you've done so much research, we'd have you back on to strictly talk about Edgar Cayce, because that'd be awesome.
My wife remains she's the chairperson of the board of trustees of all three Cayce organizations.
Really?
Been that for many, many years. But
that's
anyway,
amazing. Okay.
Edgar Cayce said that Native Americans in their culture, they deliberately lived in nature. They deliberately wanted a non-technological society because it kept them close to nature and balance. And I think that's partly why they didn't use the wheel. You know, I've had somebody once in a call-in show, and I think it was actually on Coast to Coast, called in and said, well, Native Americans were so smart, how come they didn't have the wheel? And my answer to that is, for what? They didn't need the wheel.
I was just say
we need the wheel when we move because we carry a lot of stuff and crap.
I was going to say they weren't really that kind of.
No, they didn't live that way. They were nomadic. Everything that they owned, everything they needed, they could carry either on the back of a horse or they could drag it a little bit.
I was going to say
they only
pack up and leave anywhere they needed to be.
Absolutely, and they deliberately wanted to be close to nature. Now, Cayce said that in the 1920s. Long before anybody knew anything about these two forces, about creation and entropy, and then us being tasked with maintaining harmony between these two forces and nature. So, yeah, we'll get into Cayce someday.
I would love to, because that guy is definitely, I'd like to say maybe a phenomenon of history. He's just way ahead of his time and just very interesting individual.
Absolutely. Arthur Conan Doyle said he was in a class by himself.
Oh, yeah. That's like Nikola Tesla and things like that. They just were way out of their time period, way out of the norm, and definitely.
Well, you know, Cayce talked to Tesla, or the other way around.
I didn't know that.
Edison worked with Cayce. Edison used Cayce to get information about a device Edison was trying to make to talk to the dead. It's all very well known.
I do remember hearing something about that.
The guy who developed the FM radio, Mitchell Hastings, credited Edgar Cayce with helping him develop the FM radio.
See,
Cayce did readings for Woodrow Wilson when he was president of the United States.
See, we'd have a lot to talk about on that
topic it's only alone. Been in recent years, this has all come out.
Yeah, I'd love to tap your brain on some of that too. Well, I know that you were on a time frame because you had some things to do.
Yeah, again, the dog calls.
Yeah. And again, I would love to just sit here and conversate with you. about all the knowledge that you have. And again, I will contact you back to hopefully have you on again. Like I said, the Lost Info completely appreciates having you on and using the little bit of time that we had to just basically tap into just a little bit of your vast variety of knowledge. So we appreciate it.
I appreciate it. Again, to find me, it's Gregory L. Little. Just look that up. I'm on Facebook, Twitter, and apmagazine.info. That's about it. And I know you're going to post those.
Yes. So everything that he just mentioned will be on the show notes below. And if you have anything that maybe you want to translate, you can send it to me. And if it, I will try to get it to him if there's any really serious questions, or like I said, we'll try to have him on again for everybody else. The Lost Info podcast at gmail.com. You can definitely contact us back. Let us know anything you might have to add. But with that being said, again, we appreciate it. With the utmost respect for all your research and time that you've put in with your life's work in bringing forth the stuff that a lot of people don't have time for, or maybe just don't really do, but want to know. It's amazing to me, and I'm sure my listeners feel the same, is that when you can take somebody's knowledge from 30 years plus of hard work, it's amazing. So we appreciate it.
Appreciate it. You're easy to talk to. Thanks. Let's do it again.
Absolutely.
All right.
Thank you, Greg.